Welcome back to Cbus Mob. We are here with episode 1 of season 2. I am super excited that today we have Densil Porteous, the executive director of Stonewall Columbus, as well as a few of his own ventures with us today. And in this episode, we're going to dive into what it means to live authentically and to run a nonprofit like a business where you can actually make some money. So super excited to have Densil here and to kick off Pride Week in Columbus with no one else but Densil. All right. Welcome back to Cbus Mob. This is your host, Allison Harrison, with Densil Porteous of Stonewall Columbus. Densil, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. Densil Porteous, he, they pronouns. Glad to serve as executive director of Stonewall, among other things in the community.
Yeah. So let's talk about the other things, because you are a person who does not like to sit still. So you're the executive director. You run the day-to-day at Stonewall, but you also do fill in the blank, all the other stuff.
I'm someone who likes to explore all the options. And for me, that means in this day and age, it's sort of exploring the options as a professional gay. So everything that I sort of do on the side really is centered in identity as a queer Black person, and so outside of professionally at Stonewall, I am the founder of a nonprofit consulting organization called Porteous Consulting that focuses on helping nonprofits succeed and thrive and take intentional action in the things that they do. So that's strategy consulting or also new leaders consulting. Outside of that, I had the pleasure of serving as the CEO of Pride Fund One, which is a venture capital vehicle that focuses on investing in LGBTQ entrepreneurs, really making sure that we are seeing representation within the venture community and ecosystem. And then I think outside of that, I really do continue to do a lot of volunteering in the LGBTQ community. So I serve on a couple of nonprofit boards. One of the ones that I'm excited to be sort of representative of is the Human Rights Campaign. I get to sit on the national board for the Human Rights Campaign, which is the largest LGBTQ civil rights organization in the country. And then I also sit here locally on the Legacy Fund board of the Columbus Foundation, which is an LGBTQ-focused gift fund that really ensures that we are keeping a legacy of LGBTQ representation here in Columbus. And then recently I ran for public office, just because I said, hey, why not give it a shot?
Because you didn't have enough going on. You're like, let me just do this.
Well, I think for me, that was also about representation and showing up and ensuring that people see and hear and understand that there are queer people who are willing to step up and serve in all facets of public life.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing. I'm going to ask you about Stonewall. Like, what's it like running a very visible minority nonprofit in Columbus?
It's interesting because I have to reset myself sometime and realize that it is true that as an organization, as a nonprofit, Stonewall is considered minority led, but also serving an underrepresented population. Right? I think which is so fascinating to me to think that LGBTQ folks are underrepresented because ultimately, in the way that I live, they're everywhere. Right?
They're represented. They're not the minority. They're the majority.
In my world, yeah. I think it is such a pleasure. And a personal challenge to be able to sit in this seat. I think the greatest thing about it is, I was at an HRC board meeting this weekend and someone asked me, why do I continue to show up in the work? And for me, I realized that I show up and I continue to show up because of representation, because, 8-year-old me never saw anyone that looked like me or loved like me in public spaces. I grew up in New York City in the 80s. And at the time when I was learning of LGBTQ identities in the 80s, you were learning of LGBTQ gay men dying of HIV AIDS. You heard of lesbians or dykes on bikes. Like you heard of this sort of these sort of atypical sort of images of who people are versus seeing a generality of things. For me, sitting in this seat, leading it as out openly queer Black person in this space, it's rewarding, it's challenging, it's exciting, and for me, it's about the little kid who never saw anyone like himself back then. And so I hope that that's really what it does for people today, right? Like it serves as this sort of, it's a moment of representation and other people see themselves with an opportunity too, as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's amazing how far we've come as a society of seeing more representation across all spectrums of minority, your LGBTQ, but also Latina, Asian American, all of those. It's just really fulfilling to see it. And so I get the idea of like, let's show more. Let's not be just stereotypes too.
This past weekend, we were in DC, and I was attending HRC board meetings, and I went to the Victory Fund brunch, and the conversation about representation, we sort of harkened back to like Ellen being on television and seeing and different types of identities and just will and grace and like all these things. And I think as much as people may not realize it, and they hopefully should, is that those were game changers because people just saw a representation of something different. And I think it was a conversation about, in this moment of political real challenges to our community where trans identities are being attacked and affronted. If we see more trans identities in the world just out there existing, it would be harder for people to have a lack of understanding about it. So that's the importance of representation, of people showing up as their true selves, is that it just makes it easier for people to say, oh, well, I do actually know someone who's trans, or actually I do know someone who's gay.
I always think of it as like, because we do estate planning at my firm, right? And not everyone who we help is LGBTQ, but if we do, I'll call it 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? We all know, like,
Yes.
you do that. But I think in any family tree, if you do 6 degrees, there will be someone in there who identifies somewhere in the LGBTQ spectrum, but they may not know it. And so the more representation, the more it's like, oh yeah, my second cousin is trans or is queer, and then it becomes less, I don't know, taboo maybe. Do you think that?
Yeah. And it's so interesting because I think when we think about changing hearts and minds, right? That's a lot of the work that we talk about. Really, that's the language we used to use in HRC, and maybe people still use that language of changing hearts and minds, right? Because that's really what you're trying to do, is change someone's heart and mind to understand who their neighbor may be. Like it's interesting because yes, the moment like you realize or can accept that you potentially know someone who is within the community, then it just softens your heart or it softens your mind. It's like, oh yeah. And we often know that, for the people who weren't coming out before, you always hear stories of aunts and uncles of lore, right? It was like, well, I remember, Aunt Sally who lived with so-and-so for years. And so even when you think about it, like, I'm from the Caribbean. I was born and raised in the Caribbean, and half of my sort of extended family comes from the deep South. And so, like, I can remember these moments of like visiting family, and I'm like, "You're telling me no one around here is lesbian or gay?" Until they start telling me these stories, and I'm like, "Oh, come on! Like, really? You knew?" So he was the choir director for how many years, and he never took a wife? Okay,
Yeah.
right? Like,
yeah, right.
it's like in those moments, they know they've always had someone in the community. They just never fully accepted who they were because they didn't fully represent who they were.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. Yeah. In high school, we always had like coaches of teams, and they're like, they're a sports coach. First of all, they are not married and they have a roommate. And it's like, well, okay, come on. Like, let's just,
the flashes in my head of individuals. And I'm like, and it was like, again, growing up in the 80s and it was sort of where my mom probably knew that coach who we're talking about was special to me, or should be special to me. And my mom probably was the parent who was like, because I don't want you to understand about that community just yet, let's keep you out of that gym class. And I had that, right? Like I had those moments where, because my family and the community wasn't ready for me to fully understand my identity, they were like, just let me keep you away from it. Which is, again, why representation is so important, right? Like for me, it's like, if I had seen more people who weren't hesitant to just show up fully, who knows, right? Like I may have come out sooner, or my, the path to where I am today could have been differently. I mean, I never thought that I was going to be a professional gay, as I like to say. Again, little 8-year-old me was not. I was going to be a police officer. I was going to be a lawyer, and even with that list, you heard I said a police officer, right? Like that was like. That was me growing up, where I was like, I'm totally going to do this. I mean, I went from police officer to lawyer. I remember a time I was going to go into the military, right? Like there were all these thoughts that I had. And then I will tell you, this is probably deeper than the conversation of the moment, but it's also important in terms of identity and showing up.
Yeah, let's do it.
Not everyone can sort of fully show up as themselves, right? Because we have all of these expectations and obligations to others. And I think when we are able to free ourselves of those expectations and obligations to others is when we can fully show up as ourselves. And so my mom passed away when I was 13 and 14 years old, and so for me, that was sort of a freeing moment of an expectation or an obligation, right? Because no longer did I have a parent, a mom or a dad, to sort of feel like I had to be something for them in a particular way. I could live for myself, right? And I think that was a freeing moment for me, because I didn't grow up in a space where a lot of other queer kids or even adults, right, who have parents and families who are like, I can't come out, or I can't be my full self because of my family. And I think that's a blessing that I was able to take for myself, right? Like to say, okay, I don't know if my mom would have been accepting. I don't know if she would have. She's a Pentecostal mom from the Caribbean, but hopefully, I always say she would have loved her son, and loved her child, and right. And I think that's the blessing that I take, is that I'm able to fully be myself because I don't have the same like parental or guardian obligation sitting on my shoulders.
No, I mean, it's so true. Kind of a little tangential, but like when Heidi, my wife, and I were planning our wedding, our parents weren't super involved, and it was actually lovely because there were no expectations of you have to do this. But in some ways, it's like, oh gosh, they were alive, they could have, but it's a give and take. But I think when we throw kind of expectations out the door, we can do amazing things. Like you can be a professional gay.
But I think that's everything that happens. Even when we think about it from the business context, from the leadership context, when we look at the folks who are doing and like really knocking it out of the park, right? They are free from certain expectations because they're like, I'm gonna do it my way. I'm gonna right. And I think that like when I left my professional 9 to 5 job in 2020, so right as the pandemic started, right? Because I realized that I wanted something and I had to do it my way. And so I said, I'm gonna step away from my full-time 9 to 5 and lean fully into my consulting. And then the pandemic happened. But it was the most freeing moment, right? Because I was like, no longer am I tied to someone's expectations of how I should do the work or how I should show up in the world. I stopped wearing a suit and a tie all the time. I mean, I wear cute jeans and a shirt, but like it was still like,
I've never seen you in a suit and tie.
And that's the thing. Like I let go of that expectation of someone else because I could never be my full self. And I felt like even then my creativity was cloistered because people just had an expectation of it. And so I show up now fully myself. And I think that's been beautiful. I stepped into this role at Stonewall, right? I stepped into sort of these other board positions that have really been about showing up fully as yourself and taking that freedom that you have about letting go of other people's expectations so that you can be successful.
Yeah, no, it's huge. I'm going to bring this all full circle. So you stepped in as executive director of Stonewall in 2020, correct?
Yes.
And so to me, that is a freeing time because everyone's like expectations got flipped upside down. Did you take that opportunity to come in and say, not completely turn it upside down because it's a known, you know, nonprofit, take down some of that wall?
You know, I think the great thing about 2020, I think for a lot of people, or if they took advantage of that moment, I looked at 2020, the pandemic time as the quiet time, right? Like the still time, the slow time, because it gave me as a leader of this LGBTQ nonprofit the opportunity to sort of pause, slow down expectations, slow down game, slow down sort of the daily work, and really figure out what it was that was so special about this place and what it may have been missing and what the community needed. And then to slowly start to activate the components of it in the quiet time. I mean, because could you imagine? I mean, it would be hard if anyone at any time starts a business and the world is going as regularly as it is, and you're like, I gotta do this and this and this. But in the pandemic time, you had so much more time and space. No one was calling you every day. There weren't 1,000 emails. The pressure of the rat race wasn't there. It was more like a gerbil on a small wheel, right? It was a different kind of energy, and I love that. And so I took a lot of that time to rethink and reshape the organization, so that knowing that once the world started to open back up, the story that we told of ourselves could already be different, right? That the operations and processes had been defined, refined, and put into practice, so that when it wasn't like we were stumbling or sort of tripping over things, it was an operational business and that had a plan as well. And that's the thing in a business. Nonprofits can't forget that we are businesses. We are extensions, in quotes, of the government. That's why we have our tax sort of free status, right? Because we are extensions of the government to fulfill work that they aren't able to or capable of doing, or don't have the capacity to do. And so as a pass-through, right, our responsibility is to step in there, be thoughtful and intentional about all of that work. Someone called me frugal the other day, which was a great thing. When one of our donors says, Densil, I love to watch how frugal you are with the money because you spend it wisely. I'm like, thank you, right? Because I think that also the slow time also gave us the opportunity to really think about where do we put our resources in order to maximize the output for the community. That was a beautiful thing too.
So you had a job in 2020 that was corporate, not a nonprofit. How did the transition go? Oh, I'm working for X company and now I'm working for members and I'm working for a community. Like, was there a mindset shift in that?
That's an interesting one. It's a difficult answer only because I think I had already been in the community work, and so if I weren't already in and of the community work, it would have been harder, right? Because stepping into being of fully in service to the community is different than sort of being in the community and doing a little bit tangential work. So for me now, it was like very public service. What did I call it? The most public-private position that you can have, right? Because no one pays taxes, but yet when I walk out on the street or if I'm at a restaurant or doing a thing, it's like, hey, Densil, let me tell you a thing. let me tell you a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Let me explain to you a situation. And again, not have if you came from a for-profit world where you didn't have people coming up to you or knowing you that way, that's different. And there is an expectation and there is an obligation though, I think, which is also different. There's a different kind of community obligation because when you step into this role, you are saying, I'm of service, right? I am of service and in service to you. And the other way, it's like I may be providing a service to you, and I don't really care as much, right? That's
Right.
different, right? And so for me, again, because I was in the volunteer space a lot, it was something I prepared for. I think the conversation that we have a lot within our office here at Stonewall and in nonprofit spaces is helping everybody else remember that. It's helping everyone remember that in essence, we're almost in customer service, right? Like it is our responsibility to ensure that our community members are receiving the things that they need and to do so with grace and consideration for whatever situation they may be in. But yeah, it is a new world to step into when you are going into sort of, again, this sort of fully in service role to people.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I have a couple questions too on, I know Stonewall the best of all of the entities you listed, but I'm certain it is applicable elsewhere. Is like, I know that Stonewall has grown since 2020 in staff and in services and all of those things. How do you handle, whether it's Stonewall or one of your other organizations, growth so that it's, I don't want to say controlled, but like you're doing it in a way that doesn't lead to chaos?
Yeah. No, but it is controlled. It is controlled. I mean, I think I was thinking about this the other day. I was writing. Someone was teasing me. I was writing my speech for the Pride Brunch. We host a Pride Brunch annually on June 1. And I was
Yeah, and this one's
writing my
huge
speech
this year. You
I
bigger
hope
space.
so. I hope so. Fingers crossed. But I started writing it, and one of the things I was talking about in that was sort of I was trying to talk about the narrative of who I was and who I am because I realized I don't always tell my story. And one of the things that I realized when I was younger, I learned control. It was something, whether good or bad, it was just a thing that was sort of instilled in me from my mom, and everyone was control. Like, manage your temper, manage your energy, manage your money, control. And so when I think about sort of organizational capacity or personal capacity, I control it the same way, right? I try to ensure that we can't do a thing unless we fully, really, honestly have the capacity to do it. And so that means slow and intentional growth, right? Like you may need something, right? Like you may say, hey, we need a development director, but I might say we can't bring on a development director until we have this other piece before, right? And for me, when you take slow and steady wins the race. My daughter just said this to me the other day when I was reminding her that's something I always say to her. I'm always like, hey, babe, just slow down, take your time, you'll get there, right? And I think in this moment, that's really what it's about, right? Being controlled and measured and thoughtful and intentional also ensures that you're thinking about sustainability. Can it be repeated again? In the nonprofit space, especially, right? Your dollars are your dollars for just that year most of the time. So can you repeat it again next year? Right? So unless you're making widgets in the basement that says, here's what you're going to have for operation budgets every year, you don't know. Unless you have a really wonderful endowment that's generating, X amount of revenue every year or offset to pay for employees, you don't know. So you have to be really thoughtful, intentional, and say, okay, well, we have this large fundraising event, and every year we're able to raise $500,000. So I know that I could at least have 2 staff members because that's what it costs, right? And the revenue we generate from that offset this. And so I think that's really what we've been thinking about over the last 4 years, right? Is what levers, actually I should probably say in 2020 and then implemented over the last 4 years.
Yeah.
What levers are the right levers to pull and when, right? You know that you've got to diversify your funding stream in order to ensure that you're going to withstand any major risk. What are your largest revenue sources, and what can you do to expand those revenue sources? Are there new funding streams, new revenue sources you can bring in? That's grant dollars, that's multi-year commitments from donors or corporate partners. So we did a lot of those and grew the diversity of how the money was coming in, which allowed me then to say, okay, we can do the next thing, right? We can bring on a part-timer in this space, and then that person helps grow the next revenue stream or the next programmatic area. And then once we see that sustain or hit a certain number, we do the next one. And we're just thankful we've been able to do that. In some places, again, the pandemic was helpful because it was the quiet time, and the quiet time didn't have a lot of fast moving things. And that allowed us to grow from 3 to 10 in about a 4-year time.
Yeah. And do you think from your experience, those principles apply to businesses too, not just nonprofits, right? Diversifying your income stream, making sure that you've got the support there to bring on the person and being strategic. Like, I think that's a huge piece.
And I hope that, that's how I run my business, and that's how I run the things that I do out straight. I didn't talk about the fact that I not my family and I have a couple of a real estate portfolio, but it was the same thing of like we can't do the next thing unless the one thing is generating revenue at a point that allows us to do the next step, right? That's how I work. I mean, and so because one of the things is I don't ever want to have to be negatively leveraged in terms of being able to get to the place that you want to get to, and that's just, I mean, that's if you can do that, right? But again, that's the quiet time, the intentionals, be thoughtful, measured, controlled, because growing sometimes, well, we can use examples of this in the nonprofit and business sector where we know of organizations who grew really fast and rapidly, 5-10 years, and all of a sudden you went from two employees in 1 year to 1,000 employees in 2 years, and you're like, whoa, that was too fast, right? And then what happens is you have internal operational issues. You're not tracking your expenditures and budget lines appropriately because you grew too fast, and where's the corporate center, who's following it and managing it. So I think, if you're able to, from that business space, say we can be thoughtful and intentional. We don't have to throw everything at it at once. If you can't, right, that's a more measured approach, and hopefully folks can do it. Again, steady and slow wins the race. I think it is, right? Yeah. As I talk about it with my daughter and here at Stonewall, and it's just one step at a time, right? Like if we take it one step at a time, even though we see the long-term goal and where we want to be.
Call it 1% better every day. If you just hit it, that is a huge over time, but it's slow.
It's the same thing like when you put something in a money market account, right? Like it's going to grow. Just take your time, right? Just take your time. But the more you put in, of course, hopefully, right, the more that you start at the beginning. So I think that's it. I think it should be that hopefully people, when you're thinking about it from starting a business and launching into it the first time, that you're taking as much time to think about it so that you don't have to throw everything at it right at the beginning. That you can be that thoughtful and intentional about your steady growth over time as you start to see the returns come in.
Yeah. All right. Well, Densil, I could talk to you all day, but I'm going to end with one final question. Okay. If there's one piece of advice you could give to someone who is starting a business, starting a nonprofit, what would that be?
I think the best piece of advice I would give to someone goes back to the very beginning. Show up fully as yourself in what you're doing. I think we know, and I believe that the things that we start are often because internally we are inspired by something, right? They inspired us. Something inside of us that says this is a thing, because you just wouldn't start it for no reason. Like something has got you there. And so you want to lean into the authenticity of who you are, because that's going to make you the best leader at whatever it is that you have started and founded and want to give it your all. When you step into a room, if you bring your full joy and self to what that is when you're selling it and talking about it, you will be the best representative of whatever it is that you said, this is what I started and this is why I did it. So be your most authentic self. Don't be something that you think others want for you to be when you're selling yourself.
I love it. It's so true. Well, thank you, Densil, so much. I appreciate having you on.
No, thank you so much for having me.